Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of some of the biggest stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Kimberly Adams. This week, Trump signs an executive order on AI, Google eyes licensing deals with news organizations, and NASA employees urge their leadership not to implement budget cuts. I'm joined by our regular contributor, Jewel Burks-Solomon from Collab Capital, for her take on those stories and much more. Welcome, Jewel.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us again. As always, we're going to start first with our Bite of the Week. So this is where we have our guest give us the number that tells us everything we need to know about the week in tech. Jewel, what's your Bite of the Week?
The bite of the week for this week is 90, and that is the number of federal policy actions across three pillars included in the AI action plan announced by the Trump administration this week.
Right. And that's exactly what we want to talk about with our first big story, which is Trump signing that executive order on AI. President Donald Trump on Wednesday signed 3 executive orders on AI after giving a speech on, quote, America's AI Action Plan at the AI Forum hosted in DC. And in total, there were 3. One tackles the issue the Trump administration has called ideologically biased AI, the second one permitting the rapid build out of data centers, and the third executive order on the selling of American AI tech to allied countries. So, Jewel, what do you think of these executive orders?
I think these executive orders mark a pretty significant shift from what we've seen from the government as it relates to AI in the past, and let's just say in the Biden administration, particularly as it relates to sort of the deregulation and lifting of a lot of the safeguards that folks who are in the AI space have been calling for, making sure that there are safety measures in order and in place. And really, what this is striving to do is to ensure that the US wins the AI race. And so taking a lot of the guardrails down so that tech companies can really move fast. But obviously, those of us who are in this AI space know that there has to be some safeguards in place. So it's a little bit scary for folks like me who have been looking at these AI problems for a long time and understanding sort of the bias that exists when you let these systems run without any regulation. It's a little bit frightening that we're moving so quickly and that there's this support from the Trump administration to take away some of what has historically been safeguards in this space.
Right, because the Trump administration has been complaining about just the opposite, that AI is too woke, as they say. Here's what the president said about that on Wednesday.
And from now on, the U.S. government will deal only with AI that pursues truth, fairness, and strict impartiality. We're not going to go through the craziness that we've gone through for the last 4 years.
Can you say a bit more about these two differing ideals of sort of how different groups perceive AI? Because you have folks on the right who are saying it's too woke, too ideologically biased, but some of these concerns that you're raising are almost in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I think that similar to other ways in which woke and DEI have been weaponized and used in places that you shouldn't even see it. We're seeing that same conversation come up in this AI space. In reality, AI models are only as good as the data that's input into them, and as clean as the data that goes in. And because these models are being trained on available data from the web and we'll kind of talk, I think, later on about some of these data sources and where they're coming from. But the reality is, just as there are biases that exist on the web, we've seen that recently with, Grok on Twitter going crazy with hate speech. But just as that exists, that also will be true of AI models as they grow and expand, and without some type of regulation, some type of safeguards in place. And so I think it is pretty false that AI systems as they are today are quote unquote woke. It really is just, as good as the data that's going in, we have to be mindful of what those outputs are as well. And so I think there will be continued tug of war in terms of folks who understand how these models work and are building these models with some safety and kind of bias training in mind versus those who just want us to move fast and not be mindful of how these models are being built.
The goal of this AI action plan is supposed to be to advance AI innovation in the United States to sort of win this global AI race. How do you see this plan in pursuit of that goal, and whether or not you think it's going to benefit our digital economy?
I see, again, this plan, I think it is going to achieve the goal of helping things move more quickly. A big focus of this is to eliminate regulation, make it super simple or easier. Let me not say super simple, but easier for data centers to be built in service of more energy for AI models to continue to be built as well. Obviously, it's promoting the US semiconductor and related manufacturing. It's doing all of these things to help ensure that America wins the AI race. So I think it probably will help in those ways because obviously a lot of the regulation that was previously in place or being pursued would kind of help curtail or slow things down just a bit. But if the goal is for us to win, I think eliminating regulation will help us get to whatever ultimate destination we're trying to get to more quickly. But there is still this big question of if we're going to get there safely and if people are going to be um, taken care of in that pursuit. So I think we always have to think about what is the impact going to be to communities. There's a big conversation right now going on in Memphis, for an example, around these data centers being built without a lot of consideration for the environmental impacts. And that's just one example of the types of questions that we need to be asking and interrogating that these new executive orders really didn't contemplate at all.
Well, you mentioned the sources of data earlier, and let's get to that by moving on to our next story. Google is eyeing some licensing deals with news organizations. With Google is apparently reportedly trying to recruit about 20 national news organizations for licensing deals on an AI related project, according to reporting from Bloomberg this week. Now, this comes after several other AI companies like Perplexity and OpenAI have actually struck deals with news organizations themselves. Now, we don't have a ton of specifics yet about what this AI project is all about. But what do you think it means for the media industry at large to have licensing deals with an AI company like Google?
Well, I think it means a few things. I think that the publishing industry is feeling the pressure of all of these AI tools really cutting down on their web traffic. And people shortcutting going to these sites directly because they're getting the summaries from Google and Perplexity and the like. So from the publishing standpoint, I think they're feeling the pressure and probably wanting to get some relief from a revenue standpoint. And that's probably their motivation in terms of why they want to be in partnership with Google and OpenAI and Perplexity and the like. And then on Google's side, I think they're also seeing that OpenAI, Perplexity, they've been cutting these deals with the publishers and probably feeling the pressure to not get left behind as these deals move forward. So it is marking a shift in Google's strategy here, but I think it's kind of an inevitable next step for these industries to work together to service the end customer.
Right, because as Bloomberg was reporting, and as we've seen elsewhere, a lot of these data companies are kind of hitting the limits of what kind of data they can scrape from the internet, especially in the midst of all these lawsuits. And so they are trying to find new ways to keep data incoming and up to date. So, I mean, do they need these news organizations as much as the news organizations need them at this point?
I think so. It seems that it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and they really have to work together because, as you said, they're hitting their limits as far as the content that they can just scrape from the web. They need to be able to find partnerships and make deals where everyone is getting something from the relationship, and so it makes sense that they're moving forward with working with these news organizations and publishers to better provide the information that customers are looking for and searchers are looking for.
Let's move on to our last story, which is that NASA employees are urging their leadership not to implement budget cuts. Now, as you know, the first 180 days of President Donald Trump's second term have been just riddled with federal funding cuts across many different agencies, including thousands and thousands of layoffs, and specific agencies haven't been immune to this. So earlier this week, former and current NASA employees signed a letter of formal dissent urging that agency's leadership not to proceed with some major budget cuts requested by the Trump administration. And they're warning that some of these potential cuts would have major impacts on scientific missions and safety. So how significant is it, do you think, Jewel, to have these hundreds of NASA employees file this formal dissent?
Is extremely significant. The budget cuts that we're referring to are somewhere in the neighborhood of 25%, which represents the steepest decline, I think, since the 1960s or prior. And so the fact that NASA employees are standing up and expressing their dissent from these decisions and these potential cuts really says something. And it was of note that many of the people who signed these letters, they did not want to be they wanted to do so anonymously. I think a lot of people are fearful that they may lose their job, lose their future in this space, but they still want to make sure that people understand that they do not agree with the direction that cuts may take NASA at large, and that it really is important for the general public to understand what's at risk if these cuts go through.
NASA has so many relationships with the private sector, a lot of really headline public private partnerships. As somebody who's in the VC industry, how important are these investments in science for both the public and private industries and our economy as a whole?
They're hugely important. And to tie it back to the first story we covered, if we're looking to win the AI race and stay at the bleeding edge in terms of technology, we can't cut in NASA where we learn so much from. In terms of scientific discovery, from what we learned from NASA and what the engineers and scientists at NASA are doing. And so there's these two objectives. We want to win in these science wars or, technology wars. But then at the same time, we're cutting from the divisions and the agencies who do the most in science. So it doesn't really make sense. But it's good to me, in my opinion, it's good that the folks who work at NASA are making their voice known and really, filing this formal dissent so that people understand what's at risk here, the missions that are at risk, the billions of dollars that have already gone into some of this work that would be completely kind of destroyed if these cuts did go through.
Thanks, Jewel. That was Jewel Burks Solomon of Collab Capital. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for joining us on Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Jesus Alvarado produced this episode. I'm Kimberly Adams.
This is APM.